All right. And then let me. I just wanted to log in so I could see who the folks were that were with us. So thanks everybody for coming out and joining us tonight. I am not Rick Johnson. My name is Neil Adele. I am the vice chair of Dresden, who's covering for Rick, who wasn't able to be with us tonight. For the board members here in attendance, I'll just let you know that we do have currently one board member, Tom Camden, joining us online via Zoom. We will do then all of the votes via roll call, but you guys are all used to that, so I don't think that that's a big deal. Before we jump right into the agenda tonight, I just want to, we had another school shooting today. And I don't know, maybe if it wasn't just the very same day as it does the meeting, I don't know if we would have done this, but I just want to take like just a few seconds or a minute or whatever and just if you pray, if you know, just reflect. I mean, this is ridiculous. So sorry. Just some reflection moment. All right. With that, I am going to move then into agenda review. I did want to add one item to the agenda tonight. We could cover it at the end of business requiring discussion, but it's also an item for action later on, and that was a proposed, I sent it to board members via email, a proposed letter to Governor Sununu referencing House Bill 1431. So I, with the board's indulgence, would like to add that to the agenda both for discussion and decision. All right, thank you. Any other items that board members would like to reorder or possibly add to the agenda this evening?
Sure.
Jay.
We held the policy committee meeting today, and we have a discussion item in front of us this evening regarding residency and tuition. And we are hoping that we could do the expedited, do a first read of the revision that we're offering and have the board make a decision this evening and add an action item if the board's willing following that discussion.
Okay. We can do that. I mean, you are aware, but I'll just let board members aware, right? So for provisions of Dresden policy, if we pass an item after a first read, it's required to come back at a subsequent meeting for a revote, just confirming the vote that we initially had. So typically policies go, we do 2 reads, a first read and a second read, and then vote on it. This is the expedited process where you can approve it after a first read, but it then needs to come back at the very next meeting for another confirmation vote. All right. Board members okay with that? Then we'll add that to the list.
Just,
Under
I presume there's a expedited need for that, I presume. Okay.
yeah, I think based on the discussion that we had at a prior meeting, there is a situation
Versus waiting
a
until
current
June.
situation.
It's not
that
the
we-
other thing.
Okay.
All right, those 2 items. And anything else for board members? Okay, thank you, board. Then let's jump right in. I will open it up for public comments. We would take any comment from the public for items that aren't otherwise on the agenda this evening. No one in the room with comment. Anyone online? Okay. Seeing none. Then we will move right on in then to report of council representatives. And are you in observation mode this evening, or do you actually have a report that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'll start by saying that my name is Vidushi Sharma. I am the council rep for this upcoming school year. And this past council meeting, we spent just electing our new leadership. And so I thought I'd share that with you. So the moderator is Riley McGuire. Assistant moderator is Sora Shirai. Treasurer is Kavi Patel. Secretary Anna Healy. I'm the Dresden School Board rep. The PR is Shayna Rockmore, and the CPP rep is Josh Stearns. And I hope at some point that this body can meet those people, maybe next fall, and just maybe strengthen the bond a little bit. And that's it for a report. Nothing.
Thank you. I know we would love that opportunity, so we'll have to work with Rick and see if we can make it happen. Any questions for Vidushi, our new council rep this evening? Kelly.
Just want to say congratulations and welcome. And for the board, I've been going to the council meetings, and Vidushi is a wonderful member who brings lots of things forward to the council for consideration. So I'm very excited to have you on this board, because I think you're going to do a wonderful job sharing out to us too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions for council this evening? All right, seeing none then, we're going to move into reports. And the first one that I have on the list is the high school principals report.
Really quickly, just as my report was this week, we're having lots of celebrations. We are doing a lot of hiring. You've seen that. We're working on goal setting as a staff. I'm working on a survey for parents, and we're hanging on. That end of the year, if anyone's been in a school, is quite a ride. So there you go. That's for anyone have questions.
Any questions for Julie? Ben, go ahead.
There's a mention here about a donation about a prom.
Unified prom.
Unified prom, the donation. Do you want me to mention that? It's the Burn Foundation, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so we do a unified prom every year. I think we missed it. I feel like we didn't do it last year. And it's my favorite prom of all the proms. It's from a few people from different towns come who are on our unified teams and on other unified teams.
Thank you. That was unclear.
Yeah. And so, and it's just it's a wonderful event. They also usually have a candy bar that's really good at it, so.
I mean, is that like everyone gets a candy bar? Or is it
No,
like
no,
a
no,
bar?
a bar.
Candy.
You go through like the stores, you remember penny candy, it's kind of like that. So, it's great. Lisa, you had a question?
I just was going to say congratulations on surviving prom.
Yeah, that was great. It was great. It was fun. Our senior class has been amazing. Really, like, very inclusive. What they said at the prom, the people at Whaleback said there was not a student who took a drink or food or anything that didn't say thank you. And they thought to mention that. So just really appreciative and inclusive of the other classes too. So we're not wishing them too quickly.
Any other questions for our high school principal? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Moving along to the middle school. Tim.
Okay, yeah, mine is less short.
Doesn't have to
You win.
Yeah, well, at least.
Because
on
Julie's tired.
the written part of it. So just really briefly, I just came from the meeting of Ray School parents. So our incoming 6th grade parents are at the school right now, coming back into the building, doing a tour in person. We had Marion Cross parents last night. So we're sort of beginning that process of getting people used to coming back into the schools. We've had a number of the end of the year things going on between plays and concerts, and we ran out of dates So we really won't be able to have a talent show this year. But other than that, we're just sort of continuing to move on, trying to plan all of our transitional meetings for our 8th graders, for our 5th graders, for our 6th graders. We have Step Up Day coming, an end of year ceremony for our 8th graders. And other than that, we're just basically trying to do the same old sort of tread water, move forward. We've had a number of staff members who've been out for a number of reasons. It is graduation season. So we have a number of staff members who have children or other relatives who are graduating. So we've been juggling. And Nicole's been doing a great job, and we've actually thankfully had a number of people get done with college. So we have a number of faculty member children who have signed up as subs who have been filling our building, which has been really helpful. And a lot of fun for our staff too. Like, wait, you're a former student of mine. So we have a lot of former students in the building as well. So that's been getting us through, and we'll continue to sort of pedal as fast as we can going forward. That's it. That's all I have. I'm sure there are some questions, or maybe there are some questions.
Any questions for our middle school principal this evening? Okay,
For those who may watch this video at some point, I know historically we've had our principals give longer reports. There's been a lot more interaction around it, but at a retreat recently, we have decided that it's important for the board to get through its business, and that the principals do a great job of providing a written report for each meeting. And so those reports are always attached to the agenda if anyone wants to read with more detail what's going on in the schools. And we've also acknowledged that our principals do an outstanding job of communicating with families through their weekly newsletters. And so in the interest of time, we're doing sort of a brief oral report, but then attaching the written report.
yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. And then I do want to acknowledge that there's the parent and the student surveys that are attached. There's about, dozens of pages of results. I guess what would be helpful is to, I could ask specific questions and whatnot, but I think just what's your plan for kind of incorporating that data? What were some of your key takeaways and kind of next steps?
So the key takeaways that we had when we talked about it were, one, that communication remains key, especially with students. I think I put that in the student section, that I think we as administrators sort of assume that the students know why we're doing what we're doing. So we don't necessarily explain it to what they're doing. So I think that step will be helpful in a lot of things. You'll see a lot of the students have questions about the cafeteria. But if you read and you sort of know the students, what they're really questioning about is the cafeteria for their friends, right? They walk through the cafeteria every day and they see, I don't see anything that's vegetarian, so there's no vegetarian option. Meanwhile, the vegetarian student has talked to Austin and gets something different every day. I think we just need to be much more cognizant of communicating all of those things that happen. Here are the things that you can do. Here are the ways that you can change your assignments. If you get an assignment and you don't know what you're doing, we need to get you to ask for help. There was one comment in there that the people in the front office are a little bit scary. I don't think Anissa and I think of ourselves as being very scary at all, but sometimes you forget to a sixth grader, we might be a little bit scary. So those are one of the main things we said is we're going to try to communicate. We're going to try to regularize and sort of codify the structures that we have in place so that they're very clear as to what people, if you have a question, here's what you can do to get those questions answered. As opposed to now, I think we have some people who are like, I don't know who to call, so they don't call anybody. And then it becomes sort of a question of who do you do? Well, and people who are a little bit more forthright and just pick up the phone and call somebody, get the question answered. So those are the main takeaways for that. Certainly communication around math. I mean, we talked about that. That people have these sort of questions about how do I accelerate and a lot of times it's parents, how do I get my student to accelerate? with the understanding that in the middle school, we're really focused more on the student. And if the student is ready to go forward, then that's where we're going to sort of put most of our resources. But I think we need to make that clear to parents as well. And part of this has been, we've had a fair number of changes in the last 2 years. So we're trying to now make sure that we are really clear and repetitive, because the other thing that we've noticed is the number of times that you say things, you have to say them more than you think you should. It's not say it once and everybody understands it. You sort of have to keep going at it. So we had a number of people who were like, it would be really nice if we had a menu for the cafe. And I wanted to be like, you mean the one I send out every Friday? Or the one that's on the website, or the one? So there are things that are out there. We just need to remember that with the amount of information coming into people's lives, we have to be a little bit more persistent. So I mean, I think most of the feedback we got was really positive. The things that we have sort of pushed for, people are noticing. People talk about how inclusive and how welcoming the school is, which is one of the things that we really push for. There are certainly some people, if you read the comments, some people who are having some issues with sort of cultural change that's going on in the larger world and how that is reflected in the school. We want to try to keep those people involved and engaged and discussing about sort of what's happening, with the idea that we're talking about the students first, and that's really what's the most important. And then we as adults can sort of hash out whatever disagreements we might have after that.
Sure.
And just, I want to make sure that the teachers received all of those really, really nice sentiments. I know that they're blocked out with X's in the document, but I just want to make sure, because there are some really sweet comments.
I spent most of my day today sort of copying and pasting the unredacted parts and sending them to teachers, and then sent the more general terms to everybody. So, and then they'll have access, obviously, to this after the presentation.
Just a high level comment, I guess. I'm intrigued by both for the children and the parents, the high percentage of neither agree nor disagree. With the kids, I wondered if, there are words in here like stakeholders that I think some kids might be like, I don't know, neither agree nor disagree, right?
Right.
I'm thinking a little 11-year-old or whatever, they may not know that. But the numbers are pretty high for parents too, which I found really interesting.
The feedback, the sort of anecdotal feedback that we got is that the parents say we neither agree nor disagree because of COVID.
Okay.
Because the only feedback we're getting is through my emails.
Okay.
Like they're not able to come into the building. There hasn't been a lot of interaction with teachers. So for whatever reason, that interaction hasn't happened as much as we would like it to. So I think that's sort of the next step. And I think some of the parents are clear. They're like, look, they're in 8th grade. I leave it up to them. I don't know.
Right.
So
the other thought I had on that came out of our student support subcommittee, just sort of a high level again, is one of the things that parents mentioned in the focus group was making sure that kids are starting to understand their own learning styles. And I found that a really interesting thing in here that, clearly that's something the kids are, I think they kind of look at that question, we're like, well, I don't really know my learning
some
style.
of it, right? and it's again, a lot of times what happens in Hanover is you have this sort of split, is that there are some students who are really specific. They know exactly what their learning style is. And you would hope that their answers would be positive. And then some of the other students are like, I don't know, I just go to class, and that's what happens. So I think we can sort of move toward that, and that would hopefully be one of the things that would come out of our new structure for next year as well, is that we'd be able to spend more time on things like that. That sort of meta part of the work.
Thanks, Tim.
Any other questions for Tim this evening? Thank you so much. You did good. It was the board members that made.
Thank you. Well, hey, 49 pages is pretty quick.
Yes.
Okay, moving along then, board, we're into business requiring discussions. It's only going to take us 35 minutes. Ready, set, go. Board meeting schedule and topic template. What you see in the packet for New and old board members is essentially sort of a blueprint of what we follow throughout the course of the year, so that we know what topics we need to talk about in what months, and this way we make sure that stuff doesn't fall off the radar. I don't believe that there's any change to any of the topic template stuff, if I am remembering correctly. And then the other one is just the board meeting schedule, and I don't know, was that adjusted? Because I think we did have some conflicts related to some of the Jewish
From
holidays.
the holidays,
perhaps.
yeah.
Do we know if that got adjusted yet or not?
I believe so. I gave the dates to Ryan and she went through and made alterations. I'm hoping that they, yeah, she has them noted on here.
Okay.
I can see.
Cool. Board members, any comments on the template or the meeting dates?
Just that the days have not been adjusted for 2023.
Only 2022.
Oh, right. So.
And not even 2020.
January
not
10th
even
is the
20, no.
Well, I mean, December 20th, right? It says Hanukkah's between December 19th and December 26th, and we have a Tuesday, December 20th meeting.
It's really first and last night of Hanukkah.
Okay,
unless you're
or
very
is that
Jewish.
okay? No, I'm not. I'm reading what I'm reading.
Okay, so maybe we need one more review of this, just to make sure.
I don't see the high holidays noted on here.
So this is the one where it says we got a meeting on the 20th, but then we note that Hanukkah's
Hanukkah's
between
the
the
19th and the 26th.
It actually starts the 18th because it starts the evening before
Okay.
whatever you have in your calendar. Probably.
So we did have a discussion, Dan Rockmore, a previous board member, had brought to our attention the holidays and said that Hanukkah wouldn't necessarily have to be off limits. So.
Okay,
Well, and also we missed the first night.
I
We
can
missed
be
the
your
first 2
Jewish
nights.
board member and tell you that once we're past the first night, and the last night is also fairly important, but the middle nights are.
So we're okay.
so then, yeah, let me double check then. Does this schedule look okay from a Jewish holiday perspective?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, okay.
thank you. Is there another perspective that we might want to look at this with, that we have any concerns with, or does this look good to folks? Yeah, Kelly.
Just wanted to make sure with, I guess, since you two are here with our building principals, that those early days and
Mhm.
the last day, that those look like they're gonna be okay. I know you've been crystal ball, right? But I know sometimes we've had like, it's the first day of school, or it's the, like we have to move our June meeting because of conflicts. So just wondered if anything jumped out from that standpoint for our building leadership. Sorry. which one's that? No, okay.
No, I mean, it looks like a meeting on Tuesday, August 23rd, which is probably
Before the first day.
the way there's a
It's
Tuesday,
before the
August
first day of
20th,
school.
September
29th is the
20th.
day the teachers report, so we're good there.
Okay,
As long as the superintendent can deal with hiring over the summer, or figure that out. I can come to meeting anytime.
Next, Jay.
And I would just say that, as you've done many times before, if we have an emergency need for hiring, we can always schedule a special meeting.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're gonna say the top, Ben.
I had a thought that came up in March with the elections. Sometimes, but not always, the handover elections are competitive. And there is a time when previous board members don't get a chance to speak if they lose the election, but only if they're retiring before the election occurs. I'm not really sure how to do that structurally, but it'd be nice if there was a way they could say departing words somehow.
For the topic.
Yeah, for the topic template.
Okay. If our minute taker could so note that, I mean, Ben, I think the easiest way to do that is just to invite those board members that may not have won re-election, just to come to that very first meeting afterwards and just say, see y'all later. Right?
Mhm.
I mean, other than that, you're not gonna know the end result of the election until after the election, so, right?
Preemptively say goodbye.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah.
That's a bad omen. That's a bad omen. We're not gonna do that. All right, so with, maybe with that potential modification, it looks like those two things are good. Yeah, correct. Okay. Moving on then to the weighting study update. There is a presentation attached in the packet. We've talked about this, and I will admit, I had been the one that keeps saying to Rick, can we please talk about this at the Dresden meeting so that my Dresden colleagues on the board can understand a little bit about what's going on in Norwich related to this thing we keep calling the weighting study. So the presentation is attached to the packet, and let me, I might just ask a favor. Tom, do you have a screen share ability in your role as a panelist?
Not currently. If you give it to me, I can share.
Actually, I don't even have it, but perhaps one of our hosts.
Our lovely CATV
Would you
people.
be able to give Tom Camden screen share?
Tom Camden? I
Yes.
think I should be able to, yes. I'm gonna make him a co-host.
I love the
Okay.
pie slices while you're doing it. The pie slices in the presentation are amazing.
Those are artwork from Marion Cross.
They're incredible.
We every
Kind of
year we
professional.
use artwork from the kids for the town presentation. And that was from this past year, I believe.
Waiting in a very different sense.
So, Tom, if you could just share the slides, and if you wouldn't mind just flipping through stuff for me. That way the folks that are participating online can see it as well as the folks that are here in the room.
You got it.
Thank you. So what I wanted to just cover, and this is sort of a very abbreviated version of a much longer presentation that is also on the SAU site. If you just look under the Norwich Weighting Study title. But I wanted to cover three things. One was just a quick overview of education funding in Vermont. From there, we'll go into what the new equalized pupil weights are. And then finally, really quickly, the impact on Norwich. So Tom, if you'll move us forward one, that would be awesome. So the pie chart, no, this doesn't show up too well to the folks online because it's a little, there we go, beautiful. This pie chart actually shows the sources of education funding in Vermont. The numbers that you're looking at in this graph are from FY22. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here is that there are actually several different sources of education funding in Vermont. You'll see that there's sales and use tax. We actually get 100% of the revenues from the sales and use tax go into the education fund. A bunch of smaller ones. But then there's the two other big ones, which is the non-residential property tax and then the homestead property tax. And when we're talking about the tax rate impact on Norwich, it's that homestead property tax that we're talking about. The non-residential property tax in Vermont is set. It is the same for every non-resident, no matter what town you live in Vermont, it's the same rate for everyone if you're a non-resident. So Tom, if you move forward then to the next slide. So there's a few things here that are helpful to know when we take a look at Vermont education and funding. And one of them is that it's actually the state that has the obligation for funding education in Vermont. And that was the result of the Brigham decision back in 1997, Supreme Court case. You can go in and read more about it if you want to. But the way that it works is that the local spending, so what individual towns in Vermont decide to spend on their education, is determined by those local voters. But it's the combined amount of all of those budgets across the state is obligated to fund. So the spending decisions are local, but then it's the state's obligation to raise that amount of revenue so that everyone can then pay their school system. As I mentioned before, the non-residential rate is the same for every property in the state, and this applies to businesses as well too. And so what you end up with is the system where the spending in one town actually affects the spending in all towns. So if one town decides that they want to spend more, because then the state then has the obligation to raise those funds, it happens through this thing called the yield rate, which is applied to everyone, right? So more spending, state has to raise it. And so what is spent in Norwich affects the taxpayers in Heartland. What is spent in Heartland affects the taxpayers in Norwich, and that just goes throughout the entire state. If you go to the next one, please. So the simple way to look at this is the funding formula. And so we take net education spending. So you take the look at the net education spending that's that a town has, which is the budget minus any revenues that come in, and you divide that by this thing called equalized pupils. Equalized pupils was determined back in 1997, again with the Brigham decision, and it's meant as a way to capture the differing costs for differing types of students. So students that are from poverty, students that are English language learners, students that are in middle and high school, those students cost more to educate than the average student. And these weights then are designed to take that increased cost into consideration in when you determine your tax rates. There are also weights that are not pupil weights, but they are associated with rural schools and small schools. I will add both of those things. Norwich is not. We are not rural. We are not small by Vermont standards. Tom, if you go to the next slide, please. So this is the slide that I essentially already covered under that previous discussion. But this is what equalized pupils are considered. We have grade level weights for both the elementary and the secondary grades. We have weights associated with economically deprived students or students from poverty, and we have great weights, associated with English language learners. Tom, if you go to the next slide, please, then.
Yeah, that's just one quick clarification. Does that include special education? Is that it, or are they pulled out? There's probably a whole complicated answer.
It's kind of complicated. There are two, the weighting study that occurred recommended two different sets of weights, one that incorporated special education and one that did not.
Okay.
So the reason that the weights are changing is because there was a study that was done in 2018, essentially to take a look at the weights that we already had in place that originated from that Supreme Court decision in 1997. That study that was done by some researchers from UVM and Rutgers University and a few other places determined actually that the weights that we had in place currently do not reflect current educational circumstances. So they, the analysis they did said that they had weak ties, if any, to the actual costs for educating these students. And they also determined that those weights were not empirically derived at the time. We think that what happened at the time that the original law was put into place, some legislators in a back room just said, yeah, I think it costs more. I think it probably costs about this much more. And that's how the weight was developed. So that's what led us to then a proposal that the weights actually be changed. And so Tom, if you could go to the next slide. So a group of senators and representatives got together in a weighting study commission over the last summer, and they worked for several months based on the study that was originally done and came up with new pupil weights. So a way to adjust the weighting of those students. And so we've now got updated weights for students in poverty, English language learners, and secondary grade levels. And we also then had new weights as well for the small and the rural schools. So Tom, if you could go to the next slide. So what is then the impact of those changed weights to Norwich? Well, you can see here that using fiscal year 20 budget data, which was the data that they wanted to use data sort of pre-COVID because they knew that there was a little bit of an anomaly from the COVID data. Our equalized pupil numbers potentially will drop. Using FY20 data, you'd see that we would drop from 580.19 students to 475.73. And because if you remember from the formula that I showed you before, because that number is in the denominator, when that number in the denominator goes down, the tax rate goes up. And so for us, we're looking at a potential tax rate increase of somewhere between 20 and 30%. If you go to the next slide. So what does that look like depending on a house site value? So you can see the numbers in this table here. The impact is actually quite serious. And so this is the thing that's been keeping me awake at night. It worries the Norwich board members. It worries the folks that live in Norwich and pay the taxes. But it was important, I think, to let you guys know what was going on, because you're the partner in this dance, right? So Tom, if you could go to the next slide. So the status of legislation, this has even changed. I can say as of yesterday, the governor signed the bill, so it is no longer a bill, it is law, it is in place. In fact, Tom and Lisa and I all got contacted by WCAX this afternoon wanting some sort of statement now that the governor has signed this into law about the impact on Norwich. All of us were too busy to be able to respond to the fellow for a TV interview this evening.
And then I passed him off to Neil.
The details of this, though, is so it would begin in fiscal year 25. It would have a 5-year phase-in period. And over that 5-year phase-in period, the tax rate increase could be capped at a 5% increase per year. A few notes on the cap. Because it's a 5-year phase-in period, the way that the legislation, the way that the law is written, is that you need to trip that 5% increase in year one. If you don't trip it in year one, then the cap is not available to you in the out years. So we're in this weird position now, right, where Norwich, we're going to want to trip that cap, especially if we're looking at a 20 to 30% increase, right? We don't want it to all hit in year two. So if we don't trip it in year one, it's not good. We want to trip it in year one. So we're in this weird position where we might need to be going to our voters saying, hey, an 8% increase is good. Like, you want this increase now so that we've got the advantage of the cap in the out years. The reason why I say something like 8% and not like 5 1/4 is because invariably what happens is at town meeting, we typically present voters with a worst case scenario. Through the numbers that we've got available to us at the time of town meeting, those are all estimates. The actual numbers aren't set until all budgets in the state have passed, and then the legislature has set the yield rate, which is another item that you guys in Hanover don't need to worry about too much now, right? Invariably, what happens is the number that we sort of estimate at town meeting, it usually comes down, at least the tax rate increase by the time you actually get your tax bill in the summer. And so I worry that if we go in at town meeting with about a 5 1/4% increase, by the time everything's done, it's going to end up being an under 5% increase, and we won't get the advantage of the cap in the out years.
And I would imagine this is a little bit of this game theory, right? Because everyone kind of wants the 8%, but as you just described, the state collects everything and then kind of redistribute. So you kind of can raise it on yourself. So I don't even know if that's a likely scenario for it to come. I mean, it comes down because there's other revenue sources and they kind of, shift some yields. But I'm just curious too, what's going to happen with, if we're expecting it, not expecting, but if Norwich would like to see an 8% increase because of this, would everyone else kind of think the same way? Or even if they're the opposite, they're going to be receiving more because if Norwich is paying more, others aren't. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out if we even can think about what a possible scenario would be, if it's even up or down, or because of this scenario.
Yeah, so the anticipation is that sometime later this summer, the Agency of Education is going to release some modeling numbers based on FY23 budget data. And once we see those modeling numbers, then I think I'll have a better sense as to what things are going to be looking like. You're right, there's a little bit of a game theory here. There's a little bit of forecasting that needs to happen. One of the things that's actually, though, in the law now is that if a school district trips it by more than a 10% increase, then there's this other body that reviews that school district's budget to make sure that they're not trying to game the system. And so you could get penalized if you actually if you go above a certain amount with your increase, and they've got mechanisms in the law now that sort of address that as well.
Is that also true for those, because there are towns that are on the opposite of Norwich, they're going to be receiving some benefit. So, but they could increase their budget, but not see it. So I guess I'm just wondering
Right, so the towns that benefit, they benefit by what is being referred to, and this is excess taxing capacity. Their equalized people counts go up, which means then that they can raise more money with the same tax rate. But the reason that the way that they raise more money is it's just coming from this, every place else in the state,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So they won't get a penalty, they'll just get the benefit, potentially.
Right, right.
All right, if you can take me to the next slide. This is just a quick example. You guys have probably seen, well, I know my Norwich colleagues have seen this before, right? But in order for us to do the tax rate calculation, there's two pieces to it. There's the Marion Cross budget, but then there's also the Dresden assessment. That gives us total expenditures. We take out any revenues, and that gets us to our net education spending. And then Tom, if you could take me to the next slide. This is where that equalized pupil number comes in, right? So we take our net ed spending, we divide it by the number of equalized pupils, and then we get our net ed spending per equalized pupil. Then the two other pieces to the equation, we then divide a property yield number. That yield number for my Hanover friends is determined by the legislature at the end of the session and is set in part based on knowing then how much money the state needs to raise in revenue to cover all of the budgets that have been passed. And then finally, that gives you your equalized homestead tax rate. The 5% cap is based on that equalized homestead tax rate number prior to the application of the CLA. In Vermont, we have this thing called the Common Level of Appraisal, or CLA, that's meant to adjust local towns' property tax rates based on the sale prices of homes over the last 2 years, right? Meant to adjust for property valuation changes based on sales. That's where things, there are a couple more slides, but that's where basically this presentation ends. Tom, thanks for doing the slides for me. I appreciate it. Any other questions? Yeah, Tony?
Can you talk about how potential impact for Dresden? So what are the scenarios that would impact Dresden based on this?
So a couple that I can see, right? One scenario is the Hanover members of this board might be very frugal when developing a Dresden budget. No, sorry, the Norwich members of the Dresden board. The Norwich members of the Dresden board might be very frugal in developing a Dresden budget. You know, we realize whereas the Hanover members are not feeling this same pressure, and you guys might not be likely to feel the need to maybe pinch pennies as much as we do. I will note that, I mean, a lot of this, though, I think at the end of the day, I will just, Norwich, when it comes to voting day on the budgets, on the school budgets, traditionally, Norwich has had a bigger turnout than Hanover. I say that traditionally because in this last election, it didn't end up being that way, right? There was quite a substantial turnout in Hanover for the last election. So, you know, it's one of those things, it's difficult to say how this is all really going to pan out, other than to say, stay tuned, right? We'll have a better sense of what the potential tax rate increases could look like once we get the modeling data from the AOE at the end of the summer. But I have no reason to suspect that it's going to be much of a change between the 20% and 30% increase that we've been looking at so far with the data.
I think the other thing that, you know, it's important to just point out, everyone probably knows this already, but for the listening audience as well, is the reality is, and this has come up in years past, when we're not, when our Norwich colleagues are being a little more frugal, the reality is at many meetings, the Hanover numbers can drive the bus. So I think, if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think you're also asking for us all to be aware of some of those pressures as we consider decisions and consider financial decisions, and when we're asked to add money to the budget, to consider some of those factors at play with a little more specificity.
Yeah, and of course, keep in mind that Norwich, right, is only 30% to a third, roughly a third of, you know, kind of what helps fund, but what supports the Dresden budget. So therefore, we'd have to, if we were to have Norwich realize a certain amount, it would be, you know, 3 times the amount we'd actually have to cut for Norwich to feel whatever that target dollar amount is. So it's in a tough situation, right? Because we, you know, as the Dresden School Board, all of us would have to say, yes, let's cut 3 million to have Norwich save 1 million, you know, in something. And so I just want us to also acknowledge that as well.
Any other questions?
A little rosy picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try
It's,
not to hate us.
it's gonna be challenging. All right, with that then, I am gonna move along in the agenda, which takes us to an update on March Intensive. And I believe we have Mr. Prince with us this evening to provide said update.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. I'm Matt Prince. One of my roles at the high school is that I'm the March Intensive Coordinator. So does anyone need an explanation about what March Intensive actually is over here in the fall? No, good. So, you know, I'm happy to report that we had a good year. You know, I think it returned more to what typical March Intensive looks like. First of all, it was in March and not in May, right? So as we went back to our name, we were able to bring back some of our regional travel options. So we had, you know, 3 different groups that went collectively down to New York City, which was, you know, I think a bit of an international experience of sorts for the students that got to participate in that. But we had a number of students getting back into our local charities and out into our community in ways that it wasn't possible to do in the previous year. So that was really good. Other thing that's really positive is that our numbers are holding really steady in terms of the feedback we're receiving from students. So this year it was 91% of kids said that they would recommend their class to a friend, which is, you know, I think probably higher than what our traditional class is. I don't know, Vidushi might give us a sense on that, but it's a really good number. We feel really good about that. 92% were reported having a valuable experience. So that was really good. And then I think, you know, kids largely vote with their feet, and attendance was strong. In fact, our NP list, our non-participate, was smaller than it was in the previous year. So we do have students engaged and, you know, reporting that they're really satisfied with the experiences that they're having. We do get feedback from students, you know, and the sort of, there was a range of comments, but the ones that came back more often was they want more March Intensive to take place outside of the school, particularly, you know, we haven't had any of the distant travel in the last few years, and I think that there's a real demand for some of those, and kids are hoping that those will be able to return in the years ahead. The other one comes up every year, I'll say it, is that you know, March Intensive is a 4-day week. We have an in-service day on Monday. They want it to be 5 days. And then the other topics were more, comments from kids were more topic specific, like, you know, marine biology came up as a course that they would like to see offered. So hopefully we can get something like that. Another one was music production came up. So, you know, hopefully we'll get those courses into the program of study for next year. Staff, you know, the staff feedback is more narrative, and it's about sort of how the process worked for them. I think overall staff remain supportive of March Intensive. Their biggest feedback was they'd like to see more active options for particularly 9th grade males. You know, the way the lottery system works is that 12th graders pick first and 11th graders. And sometimes with 9th graders, you know, it's not necessarily their top choice. And, you know, some of them particularly want to be active. So we're sort of brainstorming constructive ways that we might have a 9th grade group that might be more activity based for next year. Because it's hard when you're doing something that's really sort of intellectual and pace, and you have a kid that's maybe not as enthusiastic to be there. More prep time for staff, and I think that's probably true for every single class that we teach, but it's something that they put out there. I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a big lift for the staff to put together the March Intensive program. There's a lot of work that goes into it. I think people do it because they love it, and it's really rewarding and satisfying. It was interesting in our sort of retirement celebration last year when people were sort of acknowledging big moments in their career or moments they share with colleagues. March Intensive for staff actually came up quite a bit when they were talking about their highlights. So I think we do it because we love it, but it is a lot of work. And then, there were a few staff who also talked about wanting to see it return actually to May. I would say that they're in a minority, but it was a comment that was there. There were some benefits to May versus March, but I would say, again, more staff wanted it, probably about 2/3, I would say keep it in March. Unlike other times of year, I come in October, right, and I present the program study, and at that point, March Intensive is more or less a finished product, right? You can review the courses, you could, in theory, like reject a course if you didn't want to see it run. But I think in terms of, if we're ever going to shift directions, if there are things that you would like to see included in the March Intensive, this is the time to get that feedback, because obviously, we're starting the planning process for next year. We're reaching out to community partners, but there's time, right, to make adjustments. So I say that, one is one of the goals is always to sort of bring in we live in a community that has incredible talents and interests and bases of knowledge, and we want to utilize that as much as we possibly can. So, one's an invitation that if you know people who you think would be good, right? Like, you could send them my name, but if there's something that, changes that we wanted to make to the program, this would be a time that we could discuss it. But I think it was a really good year. I think that next year hopefully will be even more normal, and I think we'll have to see where we're at in terms of the pandemic and what the doctors are saying in terms of whether or not we're able to venture, sort of further than that 6-hour radius that we set this year. But I think that's a decision that probably want to make when we have the information in the fall. So I'll throw it open to questions or comments or thoughts.
Any questions on March Intensive this evening? I've got Tom, or go ahead, Lisa, and then I'll go to Tom.
Yeah, just yesterday in the Portrait of a Graduate meeting for the strategic planning process, March Intensive came up as a place where kids have an opportunity to do many of the things that the Portrait of a Graduate is trying to get the kids to be. And I just wanted to throw that out there as something maybe to look at for alignment and as an, just.
Sure. Yeah.
It was mentioned again and again as something that just a place where we need to give kids a chance to learn how to be more critical thinkers and empathetic and better listeners and all those things. And just making sure that as you're thinking of things for these 9th graders to do, maybe looking at that might jot some
I think
ideas.
that, certainly one of the goals is cultivating a love of learning. I didn't share it. I'm going to share it really quick. There was a short email that we got unsolicited just a few weeks ago, but it was going to a teacher, but she just said, I just wanted to personally thank you for leading this March Intensive. The takeaways and experiences will sit with these students forever. My student just wrote a 600-word essay for a summer program about a time that he was forced to see something in a new way. He wrote about his experiences in the Haven and food insecurity in the Upper Valley. I was incredibly impressed with his story and the lessons he learned and his resolve to help as a volunteer. What more could a parent ask for? So I just think that those types of things that come out of March Intensive, and particularly, I will say, the ones that we have that are service-based, whether it's at Cover Home Repair, whether it's at Listen, some of the international service trips, dog rescue, the experience for kids, I think is a really positive and powerful one. And I think it does, start habits. And there are kids who have gone on and said, I joined the Peace Corps in part because of an experience I had during March Intensive. So it's an impressionable time. Sorry, I went on with a long answer, but I wanted to sneak that in there. So,
I'm going to go to Tom first, and I'll come to Kelly. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks. Matt, I had a quick question and then a follow-up question and comment. The first quick question is if there's a survey that goes to parents too. I may have just missed it this year. I thought there had been in the past, and if there's not, I think it'd be a worthwhile addition.
We did not do that this year. We have done it from time to time. It's hard because the parents aren't, we certainly want feedback from parents, right? They're not attending the courses. And we didn't learn in the past too much that, sort of gave us actionable information, but I do think it's been a couple of years and it would be good to reinstate that. I guess I would say I would want to do that in, following the next March intensive. It seems a little far after the fact now, but I don't know if it would something, if the board would want to see that data every year or every 2 years or every 3 years, but it's certainly something that we can do.
Great. Well, yeah, and I want to commend you and the team on pulling together a great intensive this year. I thought it was excellent for the students to have as many opportunities as there were provided. I do have to admit, though, I get a little bit concerned when we talk about trips more than 6 hours beyond the Hanover area. And I've brought this up as a concern in previous years with regard to equity issues, because obviously a lot of those trips are going to cost a significant amount of money. Kids can't always afford them. We've always debated it and said, well, there's a tuition fund you can ask for to pay for some of these things if you have needs, but I'm not sure how many people in the area would really apply for those funds if the time came. I also get concerned too that, and maybe I'm off base here, but I'm the independent study portion of this program to me seems like it may in some ways be migrating into this opportunity that's really not equitable, in which some students are able to go off for these adventures that other students wouldn't necessarily be able to do because they've been approved of these independent study programs that don't fit necessarily within the context of what other people are doing within the regular structure of the March Intensive program. So a couple of questions for it. Like, how many independent studies do we have going out currently? And what is the mechanism for approval on those independent study areas?
It's between 20 and 30 students will participate in independent study. I think it was 30 this year. It was certainly, I think, a larger group. I think some of that, there were some circumstances where families were doing some things in part because they hadn't been able to for the last couple of years. I will say the committee reviews the independent applications, and we tend to try to focus exclusively on sort of the learning goals and outcomes, and what are they saying that they're going to learn and do, and not so much about where this is going to take place. I mean, I think there are a range. I mean, there was an independent study group that was actually meeting in part in the high school every day. There were some in other parts of the state in New Hampshire. They're not all distant, but there were some that are distant. Again, like we're trying to say, like, okay, well, what are they trying to learn? Do they have a reasonable plan? And not again think about the location, because some of the students are doing, they're doing different things, and we think that that's the sort of the prerogative of the parent. The financial aid piece that you had mentioned earlier, this year, we certainly had students applying. Our policy is that every student who qualifies for free and reduced lunch automatically gets a scholarship. And that includes even a distant travel experience, even, then they don't have to apply, but they get one of those. But in any year, any course that has a fee will cover those. 2/3 of the places this year, I believe, did not have a fee at all this year. Part of that's because, of course, it was local and closer to home. Even with the limited amounts of travel, I think it was definitely a smaller scholarship amount this year. I want to say the total was about $3,600. Those were for kids who were not involved in the free and reduced lunch program. The free and reduced lunch program, the total, I think it was about $2,600 for what they signed up for and what they asked, but they're notified ahead of time that they can sign up for what they want. I think one of our goals is to try to provide sort of, premium educational experiences for all kids. And I've had a number of times where it's like, it's a really kind of a fun thing to sit on an airplane with a kid, and it's their very first time on the opportunity. And it's like, some of our kids are going to have opportunities to go off and go about in the world, and that's fantastic, right? I really want to create a program that gives students who won't have that opportunity a way to get there at some point in their high school, when it's, again, I think they're incredibly impressionable, and sharing an experience with their peers, I think, can be really powerful. I will say the independent study piece, it was one of those things that when March Intensive was created 15 years ago, it was actually something that the board had originally wanted to to put in. And it is hard because we don't extend any financial aid to the independent study, as that's something, you know, I think our hope is, and our expectation is that the vast majority of the Hanover High School population is going to participate in the learning experiences that have been designed by, you know, our students and our staff and our community members. Because I do think that, you know, while the learning is also important, the sense of community that it creates within our building is one of the biggest benefits of it. So, you know, it's something that we struggle with a little bit, but again, I think we focus on the learning and try not to consider as much the destination or the location.
Well, I'd welcome a more detailed, I don't think we need to go into it here necessarily, but I would welcome more detailed discussion on how the independent study has been working recently. I mean, I think you've highlighted a lot of the beautiful points of the program itself, and where you're bringing together lots of kids who wouldn't normally hang out together in the school year, and they're experiencing new things with new people. And that seems to me that the independent study is totally separate from that mindset, to be honest with you. And there are just some other things that seem to be evolving with the use of the independent study program that I'd really welcome a more in-depth discussion about how that proposal process gets used moving forward.
The committee would be, you know, open obviously to, I mean, we'd be happy to listen. I think the heart of March Intensive are the courses and you know, what happens in the program of studies. That being said, I mean, you know, there are some really neat things that happen in some independent study programs too as well. And it's a great opportunity for kids to be able to take charge of their own learning and pursue their own goals. And some of them use it really, really well and do some impressive things. So it's sort of, how do we balance it? And are there some, you know, we can sort of think about as a committee, are there some policies we can put in place that may make it seem more like the regular March Intensive experience?
Kelly. So first, just wanted to again say thank you to all of the teachers who make this happen, because I saw that sort of firsthand, and it is a daunting task, and so thank you to them. I also just wanted to, I guess, point out, in addition to students who otherwise might never have the opportunity to travel outside the United States, or, you know, further than 6 hours away, I think there are a fair number of students, and I've actually heard this from students who have, you know, larger families who couldn't ever travel together. They're not free and reduced lunch students, but this gives them the opportunity to travel they might not ever have, you know, in their young adult, high school years, because of their family situation. So there's a whole gamut of students. If you ask students, they actually see this as an equitable thing that we offer. So I just wanted to point that out. I know at the surface, it doesn't seem equitable, and I understand that, but I think when you drill down into it, there's actually a lot of wonderful opportunity that's being created. And the last thing I have is just a thought, I guess, that perhaps there could be, and you guys may have thought about this already, but a focus sort of 9th to 10th grade, and a focus sort of junior, senior year. I'm thinking, you know, the awesome experiences that kids have with service, for example, and the call for more active March Intensives for the younger years. Perhaps it could be service and action for 9th and 10th graders, and then more exploration and I can't think of the English word, approfondissement. What's the word I'm looking for? Like going more in depth in something. For the 11th, 12th, sorry.
I took Spanish.
Anyway, going deeper into something about interest, where the independent study piece might have a role, right? If you're proposing an in-depth.
Something that fits the theme or something like that. Yeah, those
So that
are all
might be a
interesting
thought.
ideas. I think, you know, we have a committee, and you know, we'll certainly, you know, take what we're hearing here and discuss that too as well.
Yeah. I think one of the questions that might get at the independent study equity piece is to look at what types of students from what types of families tend to do independent studies. And if it tends to be all of our wealthier families, then that feels like a problem. So, which I think is kind of what Tom was trying to get at. It's not that an independent study is a bad thing, but just who has access, or who even thinks like that. You know, like people from certain families tend to think like that, and people who don't have resources tend not to think that that's possible. And so just trying to figure out how to make those families that may not have the resources think that that independent study might be a possibility for them
Mhm.
as well. But I don't know that that's the case. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, and I think-
it could be that of the 30 independent studies, 28 of them are free and reduced lunch kids, and I
Yeah.
don't know that,
Yeah.
so.
Neil.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if I'm allowed to just comment, but
You
I
are
actually,
absolutely right.
I actually did an independent study last year, and I ended up spending no money at all, and I ended up doing an internship and it was virtual. But I think that I view independent study much differently than I view traditional March intensive courses. I think it's much more like self led. I organized, what I was going to learn, and I created a presentation. And very early on in the process, I was, aware of how much money I would spend, and all of this. And my parents were also, I was saying, I'm gonna be home every day. Like, is that okay? Like all of this stuff. So I think that certainly there could be maybe there could be like a fund for students that want to do independent study, because certainly there were kids that were going on camping trips, and that's probably not something that not everyone can consider. So I think there could be a way to make it more equitable, but there's also certainly a way to be involved in independent study where you don't need to spend any money and you still have a very valuable experience. And I think that the people who guide independent study certainly allow those resources. So
Yeah. That's really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on our March intensive topic this evening? All right, seeing none. Thanks for
Awesome.
coming out.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, moving on then to residency and tuition policy update. Yeah, Ben, I'm gonna hand it over to you. I see we have policy attached.
Yes, and so for those who don't see it, please refresh board docs and you'll see that item and that PDF. So this document goes about tuition students and changes within that sort of thing. We're not revising the whole document, but we're adding a specific carve out on what happens where people move out of the district. As it stands for most cases, if students want to remain in the district after they leave, they are welcome to be tuition students. That is what happens for the great majority of cases. As of right now, there are two carve outs from that, both of them requiring superintendent approval. The first one is if the family moves away after April 15th of the school year while school is still in session. If that happens, we waive their tuition. They're welcome to finish out their year here. Just seems like they do. That is the existing policy. The second existing carve out is if people move out of the school district after the student has finished their junior year of high school. If that happens, we allow them to stay. It's an and/or situation for waiver of tuition, according to the superintendent. And to sort of the right thing to let them finish out the year here. The new proposed carve out we're adding, which is in blue on the second page of the document, is what happens if they move within the school district, like they move from Hanover to Norwich or Norwich to Hanover. What should we do there? And we spent about a half hour discussing this at the policy meeting coincidentally this morning. And what we as a committee unanimously agreed was the best thing to do was that if they're moving within the school year of a transactional year or transitional year, what we're putting it. So if they're in 5th grade at Ray and they're moving to Norwich, or they're in 6th grade at Norwich and they're moving to Hanover, what we're proposing to do is to allow them to finish out in that year in their home district, no tuition charges or anything like that, again, at superintendent approval. So that is it in a brief nutshell.
So just to clarify, it's almost like you're treating them as sort of having finished their junior year
Right.
of their current school.
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So
Yeah, Kim?
Was there discussion about the articles of agreement, the Dresden articles of agreement piece? So what I'm scratching my head over, because I'm assuming our interstate compact that we have and voters vote on when we amend the articles of agreement would supersede any policy we have. So if it's in conflict, I would have presumed that the articles of agreement would, it's a question, but that's a question I'm thinking of.
that specifically did not
I'm
come up.
assuming it would. And just because in the article, which was actually approved just a couple of years ago by voters, it says here, quote, no tuition students shall be received from Norwich and Hanover School District by the Dresden School District except pursuant to a tuition contract approved by the receiving and sending districts. And so I guess I'm trying to circle that by saying we can waive tuition by the superintendent in our policy. And I'm just struggling with that. And I was just wondering if that was discussed.
Well, no, but I have the ability to waive tuition in situations right now. If a junior is in good standing and moves out completely out of Dresden, moves to Claremont, for example, I can waive tuition by policy. So we could certainly have an attorney take a look at that prior to the confirmation vote that we would have in the subsequent meeting.
Yeah, so it's because it's the interstate part. So it says from Norwich and Hanover school districts. If it's anybody else, it actually doesn't really fall into this agreement. It seems like it's just Norwich and Hanover. So at least this is how I'm reading the language, right? I am no lawyer. So I just, anyways.
Would you mind just reading that sentence one more
Sure.
time?
And there's a larger paragraph, and actually, if anybody wants to look at least an excerpt of the Articles of Agreement, it is in the 2021 warrant articles for Dresden, which was approved. So it's the last sentence or in the paragraph or something like that. It says, no tuition students shall be received from the Norwich and Hanover School District by the Dresden School District, except pursuant to a tuition contract approved by the receiving and sending districts.
Tuition contract is zero.
Well, we do that. We have tuition contracts that we do use. And again, I have in the body of the contract, it gives me the ability to waive tuition. So it's an issue that we might want to clean up with an attorney if there's a conflict here, but
I would just suggest looking at it, because I would have to admit, I mean, I know I haven't looked at this particular, this is the first reading and everything, but it would actually kind of surprise me a little bit that we had the ability for a superintendent to waive tuition unilaterally when usually best interest placements or other things that we tend to negotiate tuition is actually at the school board level. So, and actually it says later in this thing, non-resident students shall be charged tuition and other applicable charges at a rate to be determined by the Dresden School Board, not the superintendent. So I just have some questions. I just want a lawyer to look at.
So I think that, so I will say, I was trying to look up the language that you're referring to. The way that you read it to me, I have a different interpretation of it. And that's the receiving of tuition by either of those districts from another district that is from outside of our current configuration, is how I interpret, but I was looking for the actual words, so just want to make sure. My recommendation would be that we can, so here's the way they would work, right, is we can bring this up for a vote this evening. Vote your conscience on this, right? So if you think that this might be in violation of the Articles of Agreement, certainly, register that with the vote, knowing that it's going to come back at the next meeting anyway for a confirmation vote. That gives us another, well, probably not quite 30 days though, to double check this concern, maybe with an attorney, just to clarify everything.
It's not currently on there to be voted on tonight. Was it added?
No, it
Yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah.
That was the discussion that we had during agenda review. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jay.
20
so I'm
Got it.
sorry.
I see it now.
Tony was before me.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Tony.
I didn't understand the point of allowing it a grade before Richmond Middle School students attend Hanover High School, because there is only a Dresden school.
So that was us moving quickly. Jay was trying to fix the PDF.
If you refresh, I've eliminated it. So
Yes.
other part of the sentence.
Yeah, we got that. So
It's gone.
So how it went this morning was us working quickly, and then we ran out of time and was hoping for
Gotcha.
Richard to write
Fix
the
it.
actual document, write the paragraph.
Okay. Back to Kim.
But
All right.
And Garrett's on policy.
I mean, I just think just the board should be aware that we were trying to solve a problem, which is kind of in the student's best interest. If their parents move from one side of the river to the other, and they're in their last year at the relative school, should we basically force them to come change school for a year or even less than that,
Yeah.
and then switch back again. What we didn't want to do is have unintended consequences. Ben made some great points today about, we don't want people all of a sudden saying, oh, I'm just gonna choose my school, right? That'd be a disaster. And obviously, we have to put some sort of bound on it too, that, well, you can't do it when a kid's in third grade and say, well, I'm gonna have him finish out his last 3 years. Like, it does have to be reasonable, but we're also saying, the end of the day, by the time they reach sixth grade in Marion Cross, or seventh grade, or
Fifth grade.
fifth grade, I'm sorry, they got one more year, and it's very similar to what we already do with the seniors. So therefore, it seems like it's what we call hardship, like
Best interest.
best interest, sorry, that was the term. So anyway, that was our discussion.
Lily?
Can you clarify if a student moves from, if student in fifth grade in Hanover moves to Norwich in the middle of fifth grade, do they then move on to Richmond Middle School for sixth grade?
That-
Yeah,
that's
that's what
kind
they're
of
saying.
what-
Right.
yeah.
They
So
would
then
move
they
with
would
their
then- They
group.
would have the option of finishing out the year at Ray, even if they're physically living in Norwich and near the
Right.
end of fifth grade.
And then, but then they're physically in Norwich, and shouldn't they go to sixth grade at MCS? But you're saying no.
They could just go with their current class to Richmond,
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
the intention.
the
Yeah.
intention.
Jay?
From a best interest standpoint, having the student have to undergo that many transitions in such a short period of time is, I don't think, in the child's best educational interest. And so my recourse that I would have right now to do this sort of immediate thing would be, because the move is from Hanover to Norwich, our students in New Hampshire are covered by New Hampshire law. So a Hanover school district kid would have access to a best interest plan. And then I would come to the board and say, I believe it's in the student's best interest, and I would ask you to approve that student being able to attend RMS instead of going to Norwich. And then I'd just bring it for an up and down vote, and I'd make the case that having a fifth grader have to move in late September after already enrolling at RMS, and then being forced to then withdraw and go to Marion Cross for the rest of the school year, and then come back the very next year, rather than simply moving up with their classmates and staying there. That's, to me, a pretty easy call as an educator, and I would advocate that with the board and call the question. Then you could simply vote. But there's enough of this potentially. And it could go the other way too. Somebody who's going to move during the sixth grade year in order to have their child stay to finish out the sixth grade year at Marion Cross. Again, it would be in the student's best interest. But moving from Norwich to Hanover, that student wouldn't enjoy the same opportunity under Vermont law. There's no such thing as a best interest placement. So we thought that this amendment to policy would catch this very rare circumstance and not harm kids.
You still have?
So, yeah, a couple of kind of things. So I think one, I am kind of a little hung up on the superintendent approving the waiver versus the school board, because if it's basically a best interest placement, we do it at the board level. And this is involving a budget waiver, which we tend to do at a, kind of board level, and typically these types of things. So if I were to make it a friendly amendment, I might consider that. And then the other thing is, it doesn't limit the number of these, which is kind of why if you do it at the board level, it's not, and I know it says the word may, not shall, without paying tuition, which is similar, although different language in what we currently do with junior year. Because it says you have the right to continued enrollment and or waive tuition. So you might just be able to continue enrolling, not necessarily waive tuition. And so I just, we can think of as soon as you make it policy, right, you can think of all sorts of scenarios where we might have an influx of fifth graders moving, let's say, to give the example of fifth grade Hanover student going to Norwich, or maybe they've opened a large affordable housing in Norwich, right? And so you might have actually a lot of folks moving for one reason or the other. or something, right? I'm just trying to think of some scenario that we might want to think a little harder on, because it might actually have more of a impact. So I guess I think where I am right now, knowing I need to, make sure we're clear with the articles of agreement, I think that's my number one, is I'm not sure I'm in support of a policy, but I understand on this case by case basis, kind of seeing what the situation is and that kind of a thing. But the way this language reads currently is a little bit troublesome to me. And I would have a hard time approving it tonight.
I had two comments. One, I'm a little confused with so this would allow a Ray School fifth grader to complete fifth grade at the Ray School, as I understand it, even if the family moves to Norwich. But then I think you said would let them come back on a best interest scenario to the Richmond School, which to me, if you could do 2 years still at Norwich, that's not an unreasonable transition. It's not just finishing up the year. That's a 2-year move, which is not such a hardship, it seems to me, as opposed to finishing
That's a
part of
great
a
point. If
final
they move
school
in
year.
late September of their fifth grade, finish up fifth grade and pray, and then do sixth grade at Richmond.
No, I think she's talking about.
No, she's talking about the other way.
They moved to Norwich.
Yeah, no, but if they move to Norwich as a early fifth grade Ray school, so then we'd allow this policy to let them finish out the year at Ray. But then in sixth grade, they would
Go to
go to
Richmond.
Richmond and not Marion Cross.
I think she's actually arguing just the exact opposite of that, that it wouldn't be a hardship for that student to actually just begin at Marion Cross in that fifth grade year.
I'm acknowledging and agreeing.
Or, I mean, or it would require some other policy exception to allow them to go to Dresden. I mean, you're saying it would have to come before the board as a best interest, I guess is what you said. Yeah, right. And then my other question was, this is if the parent or legal guardian moves permanently during the school year or transitional year. And I know that this is sort of being rushed for particular cases, but my understanding is that move, like, are we talking about a move that they have to have already enrolled as a Hanover or Norwich resident in their school district, and the move comes after the first day of school?
Yes.
Yeah, the school year is in
Yes.
progress.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marcella.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, I was just going to say that, it's hard for me to imagine an example where there would be like a drastic surge of people like manipulating this 1 year grace period. And I know that that was part of your concern, Kim, and I hear you, but I mean, I've been thinking about this since our meeting, and I can't think of, even when we talk about like mortgage prices or something, like I can't imagine, like it would be very costly to move. There are checks, and I guess what I'm trying to say is there are checks and balances built in, because there is a degree of costliness for any parent who's going to take on all the transportation, all of the additional sort of time costs of sending their child to a school that they no longer have all of the amenities for, right? So I feel like it's not opening like a Pandora's box, which is sort of the sense I was getting that your concern is, Kim, of like manipulation. Like I'm not sure what that would be. And it was sort of like the example of like if there's like low-cost housing that opens somewhere, like first of all, that would be awesome if low-cost housing opened anywhere in the area. And that would probably mean a lot of changes to the community, which is great. But I wouldn't want to look at that as like a problem necessarily.
Okay, Jay, and then Bev.
So I would say, in terms of our interpretation of the articles, the fact that the two paragraphs that precede the one that we're hoping you'll support adding already grant me the ability to waive tuition if someone completely leaves the Dresden district after April 15th, and also allows me to deal with people who leave on good standing in their junior year, I can grant them the entire year as a senior. And this, again, seems so rare. If I had that discretion, it's fine if you want to take that discretion and have it be reliant on a board action. But if I had a situation where there was an influx, the policy gives me the discretion. So if I had 10 families that all wanted to take advantage of this at one time, we'd certainly be having a board discussion. And there's no way we could waive that much tuition. The other thing, we've had similar scenarios where we've been quite flexible with this. If you think back to when we had remote learning and we had RMS with a need for a small number of kids that Norwich then took in. And it's just when these odd things come up and I go to policy, and when there's nothing there for me in policy to say yes or no to the request from the family, that's why we're having this conversation.
We got a pen and then, yeah.
And then this is in follow-up to Marcella's great point, which I think was in follow-up to Kim's great point. And for those who see me in a lot of these policy meetings, I talk constantly about unintended consequences in gaming and all sorts of aspects there, which I think is partially what Kim's alluding to. And that is one of the reasons why the transitional year language is in there. I share Kim's concerns. If it was any, like sort of any student who leaves, goes back and forth in North Hanover, I have similar opinions, like if they really wanted French or they liked a better playground or something like that. You know, anything. I want a septic system in my school.
Ouch.
Yeah,
Too far.
so that's one of the reasons why there is language and they're holding it to certain scenarios.
Okay, I am trying to make sense of this discussion to try to figure out where we are on this matter at the moment. Can you
Can I-
remind? Sure.
Well, I believe there might be some urgency because there might be a particular situation. And I am all for having the school board discuss the situation and happy to view favorably upon it. I just think this policy might need a little bit more work, but others disagree. And I kind of feel like that's the situation, what we're talking about.
Yep, and I don't disagree with that. I was actually trying to find out, I'm trying to get a sense as to whether there is a sense of agreement on this at this moment, or if it's a little bit not there yet, Kelly.
I guess I'm wondering if we need a policy immediately to solve the current best interest issue that we may have potentially in front of us, or if we could punt this policy till we feel more comfortable with the wording of it and rely on the best interest piece to handle the current situation.
Does best interest apply in the immediate need?
I don't. Oh. Yeah, there it is.
I was trying to help if that doesn't help anymore.
Sure, well, just going back to our discussion in the policy committee today, we're also mindful of the fact there have been people who have moved and wanted to keep their kids in one school or the other and paid tuition. But this scenario is so peculiar. We wouldn't be talking about like someone being granted the ability to go to school tuition free for 2-3 years. It's this timing of a move that creates this little tiny window that we try to capture with this clause. And then that excludes any comparison with previous cases that we're aware of.
Let me just, so I will admit that I have some hesitation here, but it's from a different angle, and that is when the policy committee discussed this, did we also intend that there would be reciprocal policies in both Hanover and Norwich related to this?
There will, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because then I just want to make sure that any scenario whereby a student would essentially be counted in terms of equalized pupils in Norwich while they're really not there, that we don't run afoul of
Which we all understand now.
Or we can go back to the presentation.
That is a valid point. I think I did want to just clarify when we say trend, because I know Willie brought that and I suddenly started being like, did we get our math wrong this morning? The idea is it was the transitional year at their cohort. So just because you're moving from the grade school to the middle school, that's not a transitional year. It would be if you're moving from 6th grade, right, at the
In
middle
Norwich.
school, and you want to move over. If you're in 6th grade in Hanover and you want to, and they're moving, right, then they're going to only be here for 1 year with their kids. It's not intended to go from 5th grade, right, and then basically be able to stay 2 more years in Hanover, because that's what you two were implying, I think. That's not the intent of this.
It's the single year only.
It's the single
Single year transition. So it's not, transition from Ray School to RMS does not count as a transitional year.
Tony,
So I think that's not what the wording says, because it's a transitional grade is the grade before Marion Cross students or Ray Elementary School students attend Richmond Middle School. You're talking about 6th graders at Richmond Middle School.
I'm sorry,
Well, moving to
I'm sorry to
Norwich,
interrupt, but
or-
I need to correct that. No, the issue is we have the transition, it's the moving up.
The cohort.
It's the cohort moving up to the next level. So it's the transition
That only
from,
works one, oh, sorry.
right. So it's the transition from 5th grade to 6th grade at the Ray School, from 6th grade to 7th grade at the Marion Cross that we're talking about. We already have the transition through graduation covered.
So basically, it's if you move from Hanover to Norwich after your child has graduated from the 5th grade, just say to make it easy,
Right.
Right.
would there be an opportunity for them to stay with, they've already gone through all the transitional meetings to go to Richmond School, but now they're gonna have to go to Marion Cross for a year? Would there be the possibility for them to stay with their cohort?
That's
and
it.
Go to the.
That's what
Richmond
this is trying to do.
That's
for
exactly
1
what we're
year,
attempting to
right? So
accomplish.
it's not, if they leave halfway through their 5th grade year, then they get to finish 5th grade at the Ray School and then 6th grade at the Richmond School. We're not talking about that. It's
No.
just the year that they're in, right?
Right.
I don't,
Willie,
Yeah.
I don't think the language reflects that.
Do you, if anyone has some suggested clarifying language, we can certainly revise it.
you know, I am, remind me again of the time-sensitive nature of this.
We have, we're onboarding students at this point, and I've presented this to Norwich, presented it to Dresden, and now we're trying to solve it. I guess the other thing the board could do is simply give me the authority to make a special consideration in this one case for now.
I guess, yeah.
If you didn't name anyone, would we need to go to non-public to do that?
Tony,
One, I have concerns about making a policy specifically for an ad hoc base. That's not the point of policies. So I have, rushing this through to address a issue, a family, doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I appreciate the hardship or whatever, but this policy only applies to somebody who has already started the grade and then their family moves. So I also don't understand the urgency, even given my concerns, even if you didn't share those concerns, because we're not talking about like they've already started and it's after April 15th, they could take advantage presumably of, well, I guess that's out of the district. But I don't
And that's
know
only
that we're
for high
talking
school.
about finishing from now until the end of the year. Otherwise, they would have to move after August 26th or 27th for this to be applicable, right?
Right, so the language either needs to reflect that someone's already being onboarded with their cohort, which would be at the end of their previous year, or that it just applies to like that 1 year. you know, in this case, it's because the cohort's being onboarded, that's the issue. Right, I'm ignoring the policy for a minute. Like, I'm pretending this document doesn't exist. So for this case, this person isn't in the current school year, so this policy doesn't even help them at all, right? The way that it currently reads, correct?
We did this not to just kind of solve this problem. The reason is because we didn't want to have to keep coming back to Jay when there was a kid that was moving to
Yeah.
district for the last year. Because it just seemed like if we're doing it for the high school, then in this case here, like, let's just take that example. There's a kid that wants to move, their parents are moving to Norwich. And they're in 6th grade. So the question is, if this was your kid, are you gonna make him leave the race school and come to Norwich for 6th grade, then come back again? So he's gonna have a new
Right.
school, new teachers. new
Wait, clarify,
friends.
is the kid in 6th grade or?
He's gonna be in 6th grade.
So
He's in
not
5th grade
there,
now.
but
But what I'm
he's in
saying,
fifth grade.
the point is this
6th
policy
grade,
doesn't
yes.
cover that right now. The way that it's
Right.
written, it needs, I mean, if that is our intention to create that policy, then we need to amend the amendment to cover where that kid is right now. And I think that we do need a policy for this situation. I do think this is going to come up more and more. I think that people, I mean, especially if we have a 20% increase in Norwich, there might be a lot of going across the river all of a sudden. So it feels as if having a policy to cover that, I personally think that's a good idea. I'm just saying that that the way I read this, it doesn't help those kids right now because they're not in the current year, they're in an onboarding year, so to speak, I guess if you want to call it that. Yeah, so.
Okay, I'm gonna try to drive us to a resolution here shortly, all right?
Thank you.
Garrett.
There's one thing, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't need to do this. We can just tell people that if you move, you move, and you've got to transition your kid, and so it's not too bad. Like, that's also like a solution to this. And frankly, if we're worried about everyone leaving Norwich, moving to Hanover, then we probably should just say, you know what, you've got to move your kid too.
I mean, that's what it is. As of today, that's what would happen, correct?
Correct. You've got to leave, you've got to change schools.
And again, I am personally not arguing for too bad, so sad. I don't think that we should ask these kids to do 3 transitions in 18 months. That seems unfair. So again, I'm arguing that I like the intent behind this policy. My only point is I don't think this policy helps those kids. So it just needs to be amended if that's what we're trying to do.
All right, so what I think I'm hearing around the table is general board agreement that they would like to, I think they understand the issue and that they're amenable to a fix, right? I think folks are in support of that fix possibly coming in policy. I think the only negative here is that there's some concern that maybe the language, no offense, right, that the policy committee drafted might not hit the sweet spot right now. And so I think the good news out of all of this is that maybe with a little bit of review, with some of the input, maybe from some of those that are at the table tonight to the policy committee, we might be able to get there fairly quickly. To the extent that maybe it can even come back before this board if time is of an essence, you know, maybe even prior to the next Dresden meeting, if we want to tack it onto a Hanover or Norwich meeting, if that makes sense. So am I getting the sense from folks, like, I don't think folks are opposed to this. I just think there's a little worry that this language might not hit it just right.
Okay.
And I think I also might want to just take the opportunity to one of Kim's points before and make sure that we don't see a noticeable conflict with the language from the Articles Agreement. Is that okay? So essentially what we're doing is throwing it back to the policy committee. I think the good news is, I think you got this, right? I think I'm pretty sure you can do
The
it.
policy committee is an open meeting. Everyone is welcome to attend at any time.
And we might suggest those of you that have some comments as to how to fix this, that might be a great meeting to attend.
Yes.
But if folks are okay with that, I think that's the best way forward at this point in time. We will then not vote on this tonight. But we should see it in short order. Is that okay? Policy committee.
Take that slap in the face and move on.
There was no.
It's no slap. No slap.
That's been.
It's
You're-
great appreciation.
You are
Missing the art
misunderstanding.
of the riffing here.
Please.
So with the more exigent circumstance that I'm dealing with, I'd like to be able to give this family some sort of assurance that something will happen, that we'll be able to support this once we can get the details right. And I'm a little bit in limbo that way, not knowing if what we ultimately put together is going to be something that's going to be amenable to the board or not.
And also, for example, the policy committee cannot meet till after the next Dresden meeting because all of us are traveling.
Okay. What I believe, though, I heard tonight was sort of broad support for addressing this issue in a positive way, right? And so-
Could we meet in non-public to discuss the specifics of this case? And then
I guess that's what I was, the other part that I was leaning to is if necessary, we can have a non-public discussion about the specifics to make sure that what I think I heard around the table, you know, is heading in the direction that you could then say, based on the discussions the board had at the meeting on Tuesday night, I do believe that this is going to be resolved. It's going to take us a little bit more work in the policy committee to tee up the language.
Sure.
But the board was not against this notion.
Okay. I think I could, that would be good enough. I mean, I don't know that we need to have a non-public to,
Okay.
if that's, unless I see someone shaking their head violently that they don't agree with what Neil said. I feel comfortable going back, dotting the i's, crossing the t's, revising and bringing the policy back. As long as I can give this family some comfort.
Okay. Good board? Good board.
35 minutes here, Neil.
Yeah, sometimes things don't go as. I think we're about to make up some time. So we are on now to school board self-evaluation. I will admit that I did not have time to review the self-evaluation results. And I don't know if there were many board members that did. What I would like to do then is for those that may have looked at them and have something that immediately came to mind, they saw in the results that they just want to get on the table. I'm willing to hear that now. Otherwise, I do think if you're like me, you're probably going to want a little bit more time to review these survey results to be able to talk about them more intelligently. I'm going to firmly suggest that Rick handle that in the June meeting.
Yep,
Okay.
sounds good.
We're going to move on to NHSBA resolutions then, and this one's going to go quick as well too. I sent an email to board members saying that I was going to bring something forward. I ran out of time. I wasn't able to craft that to get it all out to you. The good news is that the resolutions aren't due to NHSBA until July 15th.
Correct.
So I will have time to try to craft something. I think even Deb might be working on something as well too, and we will definitely have those available for the board in the June packet for discussion and approval, assuming that we will not meet in July. All right. Just to give a heads up for board members, the one that I have in mind has to do with NHSBA's participation in a national level school board organization. I'll give you the background in full detail in an email and we'll post it to the packet before. There is a National School Board Association called the National School Boards Association. If folks are not familiar with it, there's a little bit of a crisis going on and about 22 states have withdrawn from that organization and started another one. New Hampshire happens to be one of those states. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is possibly a resolution whereby the joining of a national level organization must be done upon approval of membership. But I wanted to work through the thought process and the details and all of the whereases that typically get tacked onto a resolution so that you all had it to review. Okay. Moving on then.
Yes, make this really quick.
Please.
Okay, so the calendar revision that we're asking you to approve is to have Dresden and Hanover slightly different. The elementary school would have its in-service day on the 6th. we'd like to move the Dresden in-service date to the 13th because that will be helpful to the high school in preparing for March intensive.
All right, I see hands up. Kelly.
So I had pre-circulated a question to our current chair, Neil. Just making sure that this was vetted with principals at all buildings. It sounds like it was. And then my second question was just from a philosophical standpoint, the point of in-service, in the sense of, you know, our teachers will now have in-service days on different days at different buildings. And are we then undermining, you know, full district potential to get together, et cetera?
So the answer is no. We typically, this is something that the high school routinely does. And so that March in-service day is typically not one that we pull everybody together. That's more likely to be in the fall.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you consider moving the Hanover in-service day to coincide with this? Because parents now will have two, if they have kids in both schools, would have 2 weeks in which they would have kids out of school.
Yeah, so we talked to them and
Julie, could you just, so for the
they
folks at
already
home.
have more in-service days than we do in terms of like with Marion Cross also. And so what it would mean is they would have 2 in-service days that week if they moved it. So they didn't want to have 2 in 1 week. So now they're going to have 1 each week. So that was, yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's right. You guys do them differently.
Right. So there's something different already. They're different already in March, it seems. Yeah. And they didn't want to move. Elementary schools, but Tim was okay moving.
Lisa?
Yeah, just a quick question. I thought we heard from Matt earlier that the students wanted March intensive to be 5 days. And so this would mean that that wouldn't happen. So I just.
But it sometimes is 5 days for students, like some of the students leave early.
Okay.
Okay. Right, so for some students, the reason the in-service day is good is to prepare for your March intensive, but also if there's a March intensive that's going farther away, they use that day.
Okay.
So the teacher's work day is actually spent with the students for the March intensive.
Okay, I just.
Yeah. No, I know what you're
Was kind of like, oh.
Why
We
is
listened but didn't
This has
hear.
nothing to do with this one. Why is October 7th not underlined? Teacher and service days and there are no school days, or do kids come to school even though it's a teacher and service day on the 7th? It's just a nitpicky thing. I'm like, I was trying to figure out. what
Until it matters.
Yeah, probably missing underline.
So that should be underlined, just so people are clear.
Yep.
Yeah, or not really going, but-
Nope. Oh, all good.
It's because it's my wife's birthday also. incidentally.
No teachers.
So that's probably why there's no underline.
Yeah.
Annual holiday.
All right, everybody add October 7th to your calendar so that we can send Tiff a birthday. Please. Any other questions though on the calendar? Okay, you'll see it show up in a few seconds here under business requiring action. All right, moving on then to business requiring action. We're going to remove obviously H from the consent agenda this evening.
So the wording's already right.
Yes.
But I-
It's already-
Oh,
yeah.
Look at that, dude. Nice. All right.
Wow.
So I think we are all teed up. If the board member would like to make a motion, Kim,
Move to approve items B, C, D, E, F, and G by consent.
is there a second? Seconded by Deb. Any discussion on the consent agenda?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought we were taking D out
Yeah,
of.
I thought so too.
today's For approval.
Non-public minutes?
Non-public minutes.
No, the
The
residency tuition update.
That was H under business requiring action.
If you haven't refreshed your board doc since the beginning of the meeting. And that might be.
We
the source of
obviously
the
have it over
confusion.
here.
You know, it's under action anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
6.
All right. Any other discussion? Kelly,
Just want to express gratitude to the Burn Foundation for their support of the HGS Unified Prom.
Thank you. And yes, huge thank you. All right, any other discussion then? All right, seeing none, we're doing a roll call vote. I will start with Lily and we'll go around this way this evening.
Tryman, yes.
McConnell, yes.
Hartman, yes.
Keeney, yes.
Nelson, yes.
Harry, yes.
Christie, yes?
And Tom,
Cannon, yes.
Marcella,
Pilatsi, yes.
and Odell, yes. All right. We're going to move on to reports and communications. First up is the report of the chair. I have no report. Next up, committee
Wait, wait, wait.
reports. Oop.
So what about that letter to Sunil?
Oh, thank you, Deb. I am sorry. So board members, go to your
I'm
email.
excited.
No, I know. It's really exciting stuff, right? Why don't I actually turn it over to Deb if you want to explain how we got here?
Okay, well, well,
Unless you weren't ready for me to do that.
no, that's fine. I just have to kind of rotate my brain into position. So I think many people know about House Bill 1438, which is being called the parental consent bill. And it seemed like it had died, and then the Republican leadership switched out Republicans who were voting with the Democrats and put new ones, including themselves, onto the committee. And they basically passed it. And the concerns have to do, it's basically New Hampshire's version of Don't Say Gay. It would require schools to notify parents if a child joined a club, joined an organization, spoke to a teacher about a personal issue, spoke to a counselor. So it presumes a world where every parent is supportive and loving and kind. And that is not the world we live in. And the governor has said he is going to veto this bill. It's expected to be on his desk on Thursday, perhaps Friday. And what we wanted to do, or thought would be appropriate to do, is to thank him for his intent to veto this bill. And the language that has been quoted is from a document that was circulated from the New Hampshire School Administrators Association. And it's just very succinct, but it's trying to give weight to the governor's decision and be supportive at the same time, but we're watching you and we really hope you do what you say you will do, although the language doesn't quite say that. And there was some hope that the Hanover School Board could maybe get in and say something, but I think it's appropriate, entirely appropriate for Dresden to do that.
Kim first and then Ben.
Just a process point, can we copy and paste that language and put it into board docs, just so folks can see it? The letter that's being proposed.
Good point. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I was kind of looking at.
Right now.
I think we would need to delete the references to Hanover.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sorry.
the Hanover School Board could not logistically
Right.
in time. There were efforts, but we couldn't do it.
So it would just be Dresden, and our board is also very concerned, and then just Dresden school board members.
I do have a question with the actual letter.
Okay, go ahead, Ben.
So with the very first sentence, I guess in this most visual, I'd let you know that school boards in New Hampshire, because I read that as like the school boards of New Hampshire stand behind your decision. I think you mean to say our school board.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Makes sense. All right, can somebody else edit this, or do you need me to edit it?
If I can just sort of do
You sent it to me and I'm about to post it, so how if I just do it?
that.
Okay, yay,
Our school board.
Yeah.
yes,
And then get rid of all the
I
references
think
to
that's-
Hanover, unfortunately.
Yeah, the other thing that I might do, and it doesn't sound like we're going down this path, but if we are about to wordsmith this letter, I think in general, what's a better approach is to just, if the board is happy with the general content of this and just needs it to be tweaked a little bit, to authorize either the chair or Deb to make those modifications. And then that, thank you very much, Deb, then for alerting that, because then we do also then want to vote on this tonight to make sure that the board approves so that we can have, we'll just add board members' names to the bottom of the letter when we send it out.
That should be asking to vote on a document that we haven't seen yet as completion. If we're voting on it before someone edits it.
And there is historical precedent for that within this board. We have done that previously with some public hearing stuff that we've done where at the time, the board authorized the chair to finalize the document and make sure that it was, so it's not like this is an uncommon practice. He knows it in the package. Okay. This is what Josh Malloy feels like when he's getting pressured to do something for IT. That's okay. We're gonna, it's okay. We'll come back to this for a vote. In the meantime, I'm gonna move on and see if there are any committee reports. Is there an athletic advisory committee meeting?
I thought that we weren't doing reports, but sure, I will talk quickly. We've had 2 of them at the meetings.
It's not that we weren't doing reports. We're actually thinking about getting rid of the entire committee, so.
What?
Oh, really?
That was one of the discussions that we had at the retreat, but that's not for tonight. So keep going.
Anyway, as you were.
You're valuable.
Wow, I missed that.
The irony is I volunteered to be on it, and then I was told that I was the chair. So I guess if you want to get rid of it, that would save a lot of time. No, actually, to that point, we've had 2 meetings now, and actually, Kim was at the last one. I think where we're at is coming up with, trying to focus on a few things. So the first meeting was really kind of talking about facilities, budgets. And sorry, I'm playing the third one, so I really wasn't prepared tonight, but what I came away with and what I think is where we want to take this is really relying on getting some direction from Megan, but really trying to focus on maybe, really just kind of 3 real bigger issues that we can help her with and then communicate those back to the board. So one of them, for example, I think, as we had been meeting, is going to be talking about all of our programs and kind of getting our hands around our programs because of the discussion that I think is going to be coming, fairly fast and furious that we're going to need to figure out, and that is the RMS sports program. The second one is really facilities. And that's not so much looking at our existing facilities and what needs to be repaired and all that, because that's being done by the strategic plan. This is really to focus on the future and what Megan thinks and the team and folks thinks that we need to be preparing for. So the next new track or the next new whatever, right down the road, so that we can start putting those things in place. That would really be our second thing. And then the third one is around the budgets. Okay, so which is really around the funding of all of the we'll call them booster programs. And that's not to get rid of them, but it's to talk about them and kind of figure out how they interact with the budget, maybe whether there should be some more policies around, which ones we have and, which program are they fair, how much, because it sounds like those were something that existed before Megan came, and they are a necessary part, and we can't just get rid of them, but they need some more thought. So those are really the 3 areas that I've kind of zeroed in on. Tim, you've been there too. I'm happy if you want to speak, but that's really, in full disclosure, I kind of sent Megan that note last week coming out of our second meeting. As far as areas where if we were to continue to exist, I think that would be areas that could probably be useful to focus on versus just kind of bouncing around. And then maybe getting to the end of the year and kind of everyone getting frustrated that, what were we really doing? So it's really, I went back and read the purpose of why it's there. And it's really to support the athletic director and also make sure that, what the athletic director is doing is being communicated to the school board so that we're not, so we can plan and, have some statistics. We did a little bit of work too, after the first one, collecting, at least starting to collect all of the data around all of our K through 12 programs. So rec and all of the, Lightning soccer and Hanover hockey, and just getting a sense of numbers, which I think is going to give us a little bit of insight into what would be the implication if we did the RMS sports. Would it be all in? Would it be just a few sports? What's it going to impact our rec program or some of the other, I'll call them the private special, programs that exist. So anyways, that's,
Yeah, and I think we sort of agreed, some of us who have been on that committee for a little while, that it fits into the wider or larger path of the strategic plan. Because otherwise you end up with 66 programs with Lord knows how many fundraising events, trying to come up with facilities all over town. There's really no time or place within the athletic department to have sort of a plan. So you're running from behind the entire time. And I think what we're trying to do is sort of be like, okay, just like with curriculum, just like with everything else, if we can try to centralize this and move it forward in a way that makes sense and have some, we know that there are some discussions out. If we talk, do we need this many teams or not? What's the purpose of the athletic of all these teams? For some people, it's one thing, for other people, it's another thing. So those discussions, there needs to be sort of a forum for those discussions rather than just the sideline of whatever game you happen to be standing at. So it would seem like, yeah, I mean, Garrett, we all sort of looked at it and we're like, whew, this is a lot. But I think with sort of a good focusing of how we're going to try to do it, it makes sense that we can go forward with it.
through the next meeting, which is on the 14th, was probably to really kind of discuss those three things I just talked about and, kind of put a plan in place for the rest of the year. So we kind of, and get Megan's feedback too, to make sure that this is where she could use some assistance. Okay. That's
Good. No, thank you. Ben, yeah.
As the chair of the academic subcommittee for the strategic planning, I just wanted to let you guys know that we're going to be sending out a survey approximately late next week to parents. And it was spearheaded by the academic subcommittee, but all of the other subcommittees have sort of added bits and pieces to it. And if anyone wants to review it out of interest, just please email me and we'll send it out to you.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Any other committees to report? Are we still?
We're good.
We're good.
Oh, yay.
Okay, so board members, if you can refresh your board docs.
Oh, there it is.
I think I got all the edits right. I think. I'll just read it real quickly. Thank Mrs. Ross for being an excellent typing teacher. It's on the report, check.
7A.
7A.
Oh, 7A.
Yeah, so Yeah, sorry, folks, it's under 7A. Yeah, found it, yeah. So what I might suggest is a motion, authorize sending of the letter to the governor. And perhaps the motion might also want to include language that would authorize the vice chair to provide any edits as deemed necessary prior to sending it out. Ben, you're sometimes good at this.
When you meant, I meant this for purely for sake of time, this is purely a letter to the editor, not Valley News, not website.
No, this is going to the
I
governor.
meant, sorry, I meant governor,
Yes.
Yeah.
but not to other parties.
No, the intention is only to send it to the governor. You want to try a motion?
Oh, geez. Move to approve the letter as written with granting additional authority to the Dresden School Board Vice Chair to provide edits as necessary. And send to the governor.
Sent to the governor, second by Deb. Any further discussion? All those in favor, I'll start with Lily.
Carmen, yes. McConnell, yes.
Hartman, yes.
Keeney, yes.
Nelson, yes.
Carrie, yes.
Christie, yes.
Tom?
And yes.
Todd?
DeBlassie, yes.
Odell, yes. Thank you, board. Appreciate it. Then, Jay, I don't mean to hit you up again, but we find ourselves at the superintendent's report.
I am happy to report that strategic planning is going great. We had our last portrait of graduate meeting last night, and we will be working to involve students in the design of a graphic to capture that work. So that's my report.
Any questions for Jay this evening? Is there Jamie is not with us tonight, so no business administrator support?
No.
Or
And Robin is out as well, so.
Robin is out as well. Okay. Board members, I'm gonna give this a try. So for those of you that were at the retreat, one of the things that we talked about with hires was that if board members were collectively didn't really have any detailed questions about the personnel in the hire list, we could move right into just approving them without the need for a non-public session. That being said, if there is one board member or our superintendent perhaps that would like to go into non-public session for discussion of these, that is perfectly fine. Jay.
I would just say that in case anyone is concerned about any of these candidates, I've interviewed them all, and their certification status is one of the things that I've paid the closest attention to. And everyone on this list, even if they're pending, are on track to be certified in time for the beginning of school year.
Tom, you've got a hand up.
Yes, I do not request non-public, but I have one question that doesn't need to go there, and that's just a clarification from Tim. Is one of these hires the hire that we approved at the last meeting? The additional hire?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Can you just, which one was that? Just remind me. Which position? Sorry, which position?
Yeah, so you approved,
Is it the social studies?
It's social
and math or
studies.
Science. or-
it's social studies, science, and math. We upped a little bit of math too,
But not both social studies, just
No.
one.
right?
Okay.
The first social studies teacher is actually a replacement for, I don't know how much I can say, right?
A
Somebody who's
replacement.
being a replacement, and then the other one is a new one. Where it gets confusing is that the person who is new is actually the person who's currently in the building. So that makes it a little confusing.
Kelly.
So my only general question is whether any of these represent departing situations that we should know about, or my other question was positions that we previously approved, but then those hires fell through. That would be my only other, I might request non-public
So-
if that was the case.
So let me just say this, if any board member wants to request a non-public, you should not feel guilty about that. That is within your rights and is your responsibility as a board member. So
That would be easier to
if
talk
you
about
would
it.
feel
Yeah.
more comfortable, then somebody
Yeah.
should just make a motion to move into non-public.
And that came up with strategic planning too, about the hesitancy.
There should be.
To prolong a meeting.
No board member should feel guilty about calling for a non-public.
I call for a non-public. I'll be the guy.
Okay, let's use the correct language.
I'd like to move into the non-public session under RSA 91-A32C personnel.
Is there a second?
A
Second by
second.
Kelly. Roll call once again, starting with Lily.
Carmen, yes.
McConnell, yes.
Hartman, yes.
Yes.
Oh, Nelson, yes.
Very yes.
Christie, yes.
And
And
Tom,
yes,
Stella.
DeBlassie, yes.
Neil, can I send you a link for Marcella and I to join?
I was just going to ask you, Tom, what the best way to do it is, and that is the best way, yes.
Okay, I'll CC you, Marcella.
Thank you.
Nice to have you come.
GOMFL.
The rest of the meeting, right?
2020, and no.
Are we?
applicants or anything. Ask Julie. Julie might know.
Yep, that works.
There's so many ways for stuff like that to go wrong.
No, we're going to talk over. Sorry.
For me,
That's true.
Yes. You good make the motion?
Yes. I go with Mr. Nolan.
Okay, board, we are back in the public session. I will apologize to Marcella and Tom. I was unable to get the Zoom operational in the non-public, so they did not, unfortunately, have the benefit of being in that. And are they still, I can't get back into our current Zoom as well, too, if anybody knows if Tom. and
I'm here.
Okay, you are. Tom,
Hi, Tom.
I would completely understand if you felt the need to abstain from the vote since you weren't able to be in non-public, but I will leave that up to you. So we are back in public session, and at this moment in time, I will look for a motion on our new hires. Ben, go ahead.
A long motion. I move to approve the following new hires as presented. Ellen Fisher as a 0.40 FTE one-year social studies teacher. Elizabeth Susi as a 0.50 FTE one-year social studies teacher. Ilcia Casanova as a 1.0 foreign language teacher. Kimberly Higgins as a 0.40 FTE science teacher. Jane Soderquist as a 0.50 FTE English teacher and a 0.20 FTE writing teacher. Daniel Mannix as a 1.0 social studies teacher. Suzanne Lee Chiambra, apologies, I got that wrong, as a what was that? Chiambra, thank you. As a 0.60 digital learning specialist and 0.40 department coordinator. Hiring Melissa Mitchler as a 1.0 math teacher. Jennifer Frederick as a 1.0 science teacher, and Jane Officer as a 1.0 social studies teacher.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Lisa. Any discussion? All right, seeing no discussion, we still need to do a roll call vote. I will start with Lily.
Simon, yes.
Ms. Connolly, yes.
Hartman, yes.
Keeney abstain.
Nelson, yes. Barry, yes.
Christy, yes.
And Tom?
I'm gonna abstain only because I couldn't get into the non-public session.
Completely understand. And was Marcella still with us, or did she?
She had to sign off.
Okay, and Odell, yes, then. So those hires are approved. Moving on, if any board members have any items for future agendas, please reach out and let Chair Rick Johnson know that. And at this moment, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Jim,
Move to adjourn at 9:30 p.m.
seconded by Ben. All those in favor, I'll start with Lily.
Simon, yes.
Ms. Connolly, yes.
Hartman, yes.
Keeney, yes.
Nelson, yes. Barry, yes.
Christy, yes.
Tom?
Canada, yes.
Oh, yes, thank you, folks. You're free to go.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank